all. Salam, namaste, adab. After a break of 2 Saturdays, we are back here, and today's topic is what is very much burning in India right now. We know every day we get news which is not really very good or pleasant. So we have asked a couple of very known activists as well as scholars to please join and enlighten us on this conflict, what we have termed as conflict between Hinduism and Hindutva. What is Hinduism and what Hindutva stands for? So joining us are 3 speakers. Sunita Viswanath from here, Hindus for Human Rights. She is the co-founder of Hindus for Human Rights. She is also co-founder of Sadhana, which is a coalition of progressive Hindus. She is also a co-founder and board chair of Women for Women. And she is, I will say, within the US, she is the most visible person these days, taking on this cause of Hinduism, good Hinduism versus the bad Hindutva, whatever we can say. And today, Professor Anatanand Rambachan is also joining, who is a professor at Olaf College in Minnesota. He is also a former visiting professor at University of Hamburg. And he has written extensively on Vedas, Hindu scriptures, on theology, and has a lot of lectures on BBC on Hinduism. And of course, Professor Apoorvanand, he is one of the very visible personalities and is good scholar and human rights activist in India. He is a very well-known figure, doesn't need any introduction, I guess. Nonetheless, he is a professor of Hindi at University of Delhi. For us, he is more known as a human rights activist, a columnist, author, and political commentator. So welcome you all. And I'll start with the Sunita Viswanath to have her opening remarks as well as say what she wants to say. Sunita.
Razibhai, by the way, did you see the screen?
Yes, I did. Good. All right, Sunita.
Good morning to everybody in the US and good evening to everyone in India. Namaste, salam. And thank you to Razibhai and friends for inviting me back to this forum. I'm really glad to be here. As we begin our webinar, I want to share a call to action and invite you all. Hindus for Human Rights and many of our partner organizations have just, in the last few minutes, launched an anti-hate Twitter storm. So I invite every one of you, if you are on Twitter, to please send out a tweet with these hashtags. Hashtag Stop Indian Muslim Genocide. Hashtag Stop Persecuting Indian Christians. Hashtag Stop Persecuting Dalits. Hashtag Haridwar Hate Assembly. You can write your own tweet or simply retweet from our handle. That's at the rate of Hindus for the number 4 HR. And I request you to tweet again after each speaker so that the Twitter storm can have continued momentum. And I request Razibhai, please, can you remind us a couple of times during our session? Thank you so much. So the title chosen for the discussion today is The Conflict, Hinduism versus Hindutva. And Razibhai had announced this webinar about a week ago. And as soon as the announcement was made, I personally received some pushback. A fellow activist who works regularly with us actually said that this conversation was ill-timed given the hate conclave that had just taken place in Haridwar and the anti-Christian incidents that had taken place across India on Christmas Day. This activist further said that Brahmins need to give space to communities under attack. So my opinion is that it is precisely because of these hateful and terrifying incidents, and many more like it, that this discussion about Hindu traditions and Hindutva is critical right now. I'm a human rights activist who kept my faith identity pretty much to myself until a decade ago. I thought it was obvious from my name that I'm from a Hindu background. It didn't seem to need any announcement. My Hindu faith was always part of my motivation to do social justice work. What I had internalized as the core Hindu teachings are that we are all one, that God is in each and every one of us, that all paths to God and truth are equally valid, that my job in my life is to do my dharma, follow my calling with all my heart, without paying mind to success and failure. And for me, perhaps most important of all is a line in the Gita where Lord Krishna says to Arjuna that it is better to follow one's own dharma imperfectly than follow somebody else's dharma perfectly. We are challenged in this line to take a principled position and be brave enough to defend it. My critic a week ago identified me and the other speakers on this webinar as Brahmins and basically told us to stay in our lane. I don't actually know the birth caste of my fellow panelists, and I don't make assumptions. I myself was indeed born into a Brahmin family and have worked on social justice my whole life, and I stand completely, resolutely, and uncategorically against caste, the entire system. A decade ago, the reason I began identifying publicly as a Hindu is because I could already sense the palpable rightward shift in my Hindu spaces, my family spaces, my community spaces. My whole adult life, I've been in activist spaces where Muslims, Christians, and Jewish activists for justice confidently speak about their faith as the propeller for their justice work. In my case, the connection between my faith and my justice was there, it was true, but I was silent about it. Moreover, there was never, ever a Hindu in these interfaith spaces saying, as a Hindu, I stand for justice for all and reject caste and reject Hindu nationalism. So in the autumn of 2011, a series of events led me to personally come out as a progressive Hindu. And since then, I've co-created 2 progressive Hindu organizations in the United States. Sadhana Coalition of Progressive Hindus works very hard at the grassroots community level, ensuring that Hindu Americans, particularly younger Hindus, are able to build a community and discuss what it means to live a life as a Hindu who cares about justice, justice for all. We have a liberation theology reading group, a children's Hinduism class, a progressive priest network, and a radically inclusive and egalitarian practice of sadhana, our worship gatherings. Hindus for Human Rights was created right after Modi was elected for the 2nd time. And Rajgopal, my co-creator of Hindus for Human Rights, is here in this audience. We are an unapologetic advocacy organization, adding a Hindu voice and presence to efforts and coalitions working to restore democracy to India and calling on Hindus, both in India and in the diaspora, to wake up to the horrors taking place in our name and take a stand against hate. The words of my critic a week ago are par for the course. We understand that the track record of Hindu traditions, particularly because of the atrocity of caste, which dates back thousands of years and persists till the present day, is marred. We understand that our Hindu communities, both in India and in the diaspora, are currently under the thrall, very sadly, of a hateful political ideology. The only people who seem to identify as Hindus these days are Hindutva aligned. It is hard for progressive people to trust us immediately. We get it. However, I lay out a few urgent points. If the majority community in India and the Indian diaspora, the Hindu community, does not take a stand against Hindutva, Hindutva will continue to grow. Similarly, the only way caste will be annihilated is if Hindus change their beliefs and practices and reject caste entirely. Justice movements, anti-caste movements, pro-democracy movements, which rely on broad coalitions, must include Hindus who speak as Hindus if they are to have any chance of succeeding. You all know about the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference last year. One key theme in that conference and in a lot of public discourse at the time of the conference and in the months after, and indeed even right now, is about whether Hindutva and Hinduism are one and the same or opposites. I'm not an academic, I'm a human rights activist. While we debate about whether Hindutva and Hinduism are the same or opposites, the right wing has been transforming Hindutva into a Hindu Rashtra. It is time for coming together, speaking up, raising our voices, taking action, taking risks, and making sacrifices for the sake of minority rights and democracy. I work on women's rights in Afghanistan, and some people in that fight argue that the Taliban are not true Muslims. I'm not a religious scholar, and I'm certainly not Muslim, I'm Hindu. But in my eyes, Taliban are Muslims. However, their Islam bears very little resemblance to the Islam of my beloved Afghan colleagues who daily put their lives on the line to protect the lives of women and little girls. Similarly, I do not argue that those who are followers of Hindutva are not Hindu. If they call themselves Hindu, then they are Hindu. But their vision of Hindu identity is nothing I can recognize or accept. We don't need a textbook definition of Hindutva to know what it stands for. It defines itself quite clearly by its violent words and actions on the streets every day, be it lynchings, social boycotts, attacks on Muslim and Christian places of worship, and so on. We are all aware of daily atrocities in India where Muslims, Christians, and Dalits are lynched, where anyone who speaks or even tweets dissent is thrown into jail, where there are open calls for genocide against Muslims, and where Hindutva mobs break into churches on Christmas Day to chant Jai Shri Ram and break the statues of Jesus, and where more than hundreds of Muslim women woke up on New Year's Day to find their photos included in a horrific online auction. It is for you all to decide if Hinduism and Hindutva are one and the same. And the more that we argue that Hindutva and Hindu traditions are one and the same, the nightmare will continue, and I shudder to think where it will end. Hindus must reject Hindutva and choose the path of sanity, love, peace, unity, democracy, and non-Hindus must make space for that to happen. We can all hold each other accountable. We can push back on each other, point out where our colleagues and allies and neighbors make mistakes, say the wrong words. But there has to be an overriding recognition, a sincere acknowledgement deep down in our hearts that we're all in this together. Not enough Hindus are speaking up against Hindutva. This is true. According to a survey conducted in the US last year, only 40% of Hindu Indian Americans believe Hindutva is a threat to Hindu democracy. But when Hindus do speak up, please, let's welcome them. It is such an obvious point that Hindutva is a form of Hindu identity, its most hateful and extremist expression. I see no benefit in pointing out such an obvious technicality, only horrific losses. Much more important, indeed urgent, is that we welcome progressive and loving Hindus who are openly rejecting Hindutva and caste into our movements and coalitions. Hindus whose hearts are breaking at the violence taking place in our name, who are saying to the Hindutva goons, mobs, political leaders, genocidal swamis, and most important of all, to our own family members, our own priests, our elders, not in our name. I'm eager to hear the reflections of my esteemed and respected co-panelists, Professor Apoorvanand, a scholar and social activist who will speak about the Indian context, where the calls for a genocide against Muslims and the transformation of India into a Hindutva authoritarian state are escalating. He will tell his own story and will reflect on the role of the Indian Hindu at this dark hour. and Professor Anatanand Rambachan, who is my own guru and mentor, will bring both a diasporic perspective to the same questions, since he is from Trinidad, and a theological perspective, since he is a Vedantic scholar and a professor of religion. More than anyone else, it is Anandji who has taught me that the Hindu traditions are replete with resources and teachings for social justice. And he is the only Hindu scholar responding to Bhimrao Ambedkar's challenge to envision a Hindu identity that rejects caste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunita, so much. And now I invite Professor Anandan Rambachan sir to speak for the audience. Anand sir.
Thank you. Thank you. My dear sisters and brothers, greetings and respect to each one of you joining our conversation today. It is an honor to be invited to add my voice to this dialogue. And I look forward to your questions and our discussions that will follow. I want to preface my remarks with just a few general points. Of course, to concur with all of the points made by my sister Sunita ji. The first is that Hindutva is an ideology of Hindu nationalism. Of course, as a nationalistic Hindu ideology, it has its own unique flavor, its own unique characteristics. But at the same time, it is important that we see that Hindutva or Hindu nationalism shares certain general features with other contemporary expressions of religious nationalism. Those of you who come from the United States or who follow events here in the United States would know the problems that we are experiencing with the rise of Christian nationalism here and its the political forms that it is currently taking. Buddhism has its own versions of Buddhist nationalism. Sri Lanka, I think, is a good example of that and of the tensions associated with the rise of nationalism in the Buddhist tradition. You can look also at Myanmar as an example of Buddhist nationalism with its own problems for minorities. And of course, as Sunita ji said in her comments on Afghanistan and other places, we can also identify forms of Islamic nationalism. So I think it's good to see that Hindutva is a particular version of a problematic ways of thinking about the meaning of national identity in our contemporary world. The second point I want to make is one that was highlighted by Sunita, which is that, and as I'll develop this a little more in my presentation to you, but this is that what we speak of today as Hindutva, I think it is helpful to think of it as a particular interpretation or a particular version of the meaning of Hindu identity. It is one that I disagree with profoundly, and I'll tell you why I disagree with it. But I think we would be misleading ourselves if we did not also understand that those who profess it with the belief that they are professing the right version of the Hindu tradition. Because I think what is happening in the Hindu tradition and in the Hindu world today is a very bitter but historically important contest about what it means to be Hindu. And of course, where one comes down on the side of this debate has implications for the nation of India. So I see Hinduism and Hindutva as two versions of a contested understanding of what it means to be Hindu, but I'll come back to this in a moment. Coming to the word itself, because I think when we have discussions like these, it is very important that we have some clarity about what we are discussing. So the word Hindutva itself, tva means, tva is a Sanskrit suffix. So it is probably most accurately translated as Hinduness. In other words, the essence, it attempts to articulate the essence of what it means to be Hindu, Hindutva. So some, recent debates that I have participated, some emphasize, this grammatical meaning of the term and say, what is the problem? It simply means the essence of the Hindu tradition. Of course, that's only the beginning. The problem is how does one define or understand that essence? And I think, and this is where I'll, begin with, I think that in order to understand, while the term is used in a variety of ways, but I think the way in which it is used as an ideology in contemporary Hindu discourse, in Hindu articulations, can only be understood by looking back at the first systematic articulation of this ideology, because present day versions of Hindutva draw deeply and are deeply connected to this historical articulation of the meaning of Hinduism. And I am referring here to this important work by V.D. Savarkar, who wrote the seminal text, Hindutva, or Who is a Hindu. Now, although Savarkar uses the term Hindutva, we must remember that he is essentially outlining the broader definition of an Indian identity. Who qualifies to be a true Indian, although he is using the word Hindu. So his preference for the term Hindutva should not be construed primarily as indicative of a religious definition. In his book, he employs the name Hindustan for India. And both of these names, Hindustan and India, have a geographical origin and are connected with the Indus River. Hindu is only a Persian variation in the pronunciation of the name of this river, which was called Sindhu, etc. So it is important to understand that for Savarkar, the terms Hindu and Indian are synonymous. This is, of course, has its own problem. So with that in mind, who is an Indian in Savarkar's definition of Hindutva? Who qualifies to be an Indian? And of course, this is where the problem arises for minorities in India, like Muslims and Christians. So very quickly, I identify three dimensions of his definition of Indian identity, or appropriate of what he considers to be right Indian identity. The first, of course, is geographical. So India, or Hindustan, as Savarkar would prefer to call it, constitutes a distinct geographical entity demarcated by mountains and oceans and rivers. And so for him, a Hindu or an Indian, let me put it in this way, is primarily a citizen either in himself or through his ancestors of this land, of Hindustan. This is his first criteria. An Indian is a citizen of India. A Hindu is a citizen of Hindustan. So on the basis of this first criteria, let us say an American who becomes a citizen of Hindustan is entitled to be treated as a fellow countryman or countrywoman. However, such a person will not be incorporated into the Indian fold if he or she does not satisfy the second requisite of Hinduness or Hindutva as articulated by Sarabhai. And what is that? The second is ancestry, common ancestry. So the one is citizenship in India. Second, common ancestry, or as he prefers to use it, he speaks of common blood. In Sanskrit, he uses the word jati. So for him, a Hindu is a descendant of Hindu parents and shares with other Hindus, I put it in inverted commas, common blood, common ancestry. So if you think about it, on the basis of the first two criteria, citizenship in India and certain common ancestral roots, Muslim citizens of India may indeed be considered rightfully as, again, I'm not trying to label anyone, but I'm using his terminology. They may be rightfully considered as Hindus or Indians, since they are citizens of India and descendants of common ancestors. So he recognized this fact. So he asked, but can we, in his book, he says, then he goes on to ask, but can we who are here concerned with investigating facts as they are not as they should be, recognize Muslims as Hindus or as rightful citizens of India? And he answers his own question negatively. And this brings me to the third criteria that Sarabhai articulates. And this is the connection or the tie of homage to what he calls Hindu culture or Hindu civilization. He calls this Sanskriti on the basis of the claim, of course, contested again, that Sanskrit is the language that expresses and preserves all that is worthy in the history of the Hindus. Forget for a moment the way in which that dismisses other languages and cultures in the diversity of the Indian subcontinent. So he answers his own question by saying that Muslims and Christians do not belong to this culture. This is what he calls this Sanskriti culture. They belong, or that they feel they belong, to a cultural unit that is totally altogether different from the Hindu or the Indian one. So see how he moves to marginalize these groups on the basis of the criteria that he uses. So he includes in his definition of who is legitimately Indian, Hindu, he includes other traditions having their roots in India, such as Jains, Sikhs, I would have to say South Asian Buddhists. He puts them in the generic character of Hinduism or Hindu Dharma, but excludes minorities such as Muslims and of course Christians. This is where he finds his justification to do that. So let me just read one passage from this book, because it's very important in understanding contemporary Hindutva ideology. And I'm quoting now: "For though Hindustan is to them is fatherland as to other Hindu, yet it is not to them a holy land. The Holy Land is far off in Arabia or Palestine. Their mythology and godmen, ideas and heroes are not the children of this soil. Consequently, their names and their outlook smack of foreign origin. Their love is divided. Nay, if some of them be really believing what they profess to do, then there can be no choice. They must to a man set their holy land above their fatherland in their love and allegiance." We are not condemning, nor are we lamenting. We are simply telling facts as they stand. We have tried to determine the essentials of Hindutva And in doing so, we have discovered that Muslims and Christians possess all the essential qualifications of Hindutva, but one, and they don't look upon India as what he calls Punya Bhumi or Holy Land. Keep in mind that today Sarvakar's portrait sits in the Indian Parliament opposite that of Mahatma Gandhi. So I just emphasize that point to show you why his ideology is important. So where does religion fit into this? So for Sarvakar, what he calls Hinduism is the ism of Hindutva. In other words, he defines the Hindu on the basis of the criteria, citizenship in India, birth, having Indian parents, ancestry, and thirdly, Sanskriti or shared culture. He himself was not a religious person. He was an atheist, but Hinduism or religion is one dimension of that. This is why he includes Buddhist, Jain, Sikhs as acceptable to his definition, but then marginalizes and excludes Christians and a Muslim. Now, why is this problematic for me as a Hindu scholar and as a Hindu practitioner? Why do I challenge this way of thinking about defining identity, and especially defining what it means to be Hindu? And of course, in the interest of time, I can only briefly identify the sources of my problems with this ideology of Hindutva. First of all, Hindutva, or the Hindu interpretation of the Hindutva interpretation of the meaning of Indian identity, or the meaning of Hindu identity, is that Hindutva is a philosophy of religious nationalism. It is, as you see, he says, to be legitimately Indian, one has to regard India as Punya Bhumi, or as Holy Land. So it's a philosophy of religious nationalism that divinizes, I use that word, that divinizes the land of India. It goes beyond, commitment and loyalty to the nation. I think it actually divinizes the the nation, and proposes the highest aim of life to be that of service and defense of Matru Bhumi, the motherland. I think that this is the Hindu tradition, or the Hindu tradition to which I give my loyalty and my commitment, does not divinize the nation, does not divinize a particular nation. It has a vision of divine transcendence. It calls us to if we have to see God anywhere, we should see God everywhere, not in a particular nation that is somehow prioritized above all other nations. Because I think invoking the nation, as Hindutva does, invoking the nation as an object of ultimate value, too often means, as we see today, that actions that are undertaken in the name of the nation are exempt, are regarded as exempt from criticism, and that criticism is regarded as sacrilegious and as an act of disloyalty. I think this is what happens when you exalt the nation in the way in which this nationalistic ideology does. The glorification of the nation is often, in actuality, the exaltation of a particular religious community above all other groups considered to have higher worth. And as you can see in this ideology, the hierarchical ordering of the worth of different communities in the nation, where Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs are higher in the hierarchy and marginalized or considered as not meeting definitions of Indian identity, would be Muslims and Christians. So the problems of attributing ultimate value to a finite nation take a very sinister term in contemporary India with violent consequences when definitions of nation and national identity, like that is offered by Sarvarkar, are championed, as I said, in ways that exclude some communities and privilege others. So you have that its adoption. Savarkar's definition as adopted by Hindu nationalists is associated, as Sunita has described, with attitudes of hostility, mistrust, increasing violence towards those minorities that do not satisfy his criteria. So, for example, think of the demand that is so often made with violent consequences that everyone says, Bharat Mata ki Jai. So here you see a slogan that divinizes the nation and which is used as the test of national loyalty. So it's again, it does not offer, Hindutva does not offer any transcendent source of meaning from which one could criticize the idea of the nation and the construction of national identity. Secondly, very quickly, because I'm using up my time, I object to this interpretation of the Hindu tradition because I think, as I've hinted already, it conflates religious and national identity. For Sarvarkar, Hindu is both a religious and a national identity. So the national loyalty of Indian Muslims and Christians, as seen by him as followers of alien religious traditions, is regarded with suspicion. So the problem here that in the Hindutva understanding, the Hindu religious tradition does not make universal theological claims. It addresses itself only to a very specific national, ethnic, and cultural community. In other words, Hindutva overlooks what I regard as a universal humaneness of Hinduism and narrowly identifies it with nation and common ancestry, and which in that definition excludes significant numbers of the Indian population. Finally, to conclude, I would add that Hindutva champions a form of majority rule that is intolerant of plural identities by asserting a definition of nationality and loyalty that excludes. And this raises a lot of questions about, the nature of Hinduism as a religion. So I want to end by calling again to the fact that there's an ancient and powerful tradition of hospitality to religious diversity, to plural identities in the Hindu tradition, which made it possible to accommodate a wide diversity of religious beliefs and practices, and to offer shelter to persecuted religious groups for a long part of history. I think it is this genuine openness to diverse understandings of national identity and diversity which can point the way forward again as India agonizes over its identity. If it opts for a form of majority rule, which is intolerant of plural identities, it will send a tragic message to other countries which are struggling with the challenges of diversity. I think in the diaspora, Hindus need to put themselves imaginatively, it's already happening, but suppose you had a definition of national identity here in the United States that articulated a Christian nationalism, that privileged Christian American identity and marginalized everyone as unworthy participants in the nation. We would not be silent about it. We will lift our voices. And so I think that a robust Hindu theology of diversity, religious diversity, is important to challenge, to counter the tendency and the temptation on the part of religious nationalists to dominate the state. And so I would fall back to that inclusive openness of the Hindu tradition to diversity and to definitions of citizenship that are not exclusive and that don't marginalize important communities. Thank you very much, my brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Professor. It was quite enlightening and very educational. And let's move on to Professor Apoorvanand's thoughts, and then later on we will come for question and answer. Professor Apoorvanand ji.
Yeah. Shukriya, Razi Saab.
Ji.
For having me here. And I don't have much to add after Anatanand's speech, but because I agree with almost everything that he has said. And we can understand what now we mean by Hindutva. Hindutva is an Indian problem, if you look at it. It's not something related to any theological issue Hindus are concerned with. It's an Indian problem. So Hindus living outside India, how do they relate to Hindutva? This is a question they will have to. So when I was asked to join this discussion, I was in dilemma because I'm not an expert in theology, and I'm not in that sense a religious Hindu. But I can't deny that I would be identified as Hindu. This fact remains very much there. So I have to own this Hinduness, which my birth, by virtue of my birth, or my associations is attached to me. So, however, I like to distance myself from this identity, which in my earlier years I did try to do, and later it was pointless. And I have to establish a relationship with this Hinduness, so and own it. So when I come to you and when I join this discussion, I do it with great trepidation, because I'm not, as I told you, I'm not an expert like Anatanand. But Hindutva is an issue for me, because Hindutva has very much to do with our understanding of how we live together. And this is a question we need to answer. How would we live together? And this is a question which is applicable to people not only living in India, but elsewhere too. So it's a universal question, it's a global. And I think that all of us need to treat ourselves as global citizens, even if we live in our own geographical and national limitations, and we cannot transcend our citizenship, the citizenship that is given to us. So with these questions, we approach this issue. And living in India, I often think these days about this debate of what is the difference between Hinduness and Hindutva, and who are concerned with it. How does it help a Muslim if Hindus tell Muslims that we don't belong to Hindutva fold because they are being attacked daily in the name of Hindutva, and they have no reprieve. And it applies to Christians as well. So how does it help them? How does it help if all of us start telling them that, look, we don't belong to the philosophy of Hindutva, and we are real Hindus, and they are not Hindus. As Sunita rightly said, that they are also Hindus, and we cannot deny this fact. So the problem in India is to fight with those forces which are ruling now and ruling in the name of Hindus. And as Anatanand ji rightly said, that they are practicing a religio-ethnic variety of nationalism, which speaks in Hindu idioms. So this force is now ruling India and most parts of India. And it has now assumed dangerous proportions, and it is becoming an existential threat to Muslims and Christians. Not speaking about Dalits, because Dalits are also in many ways co-opted in the fold of Hindutva. So the problem before Hindus is to first recognize the fact that radicalization in Hindu society is taking place, and the pace of it is something they have failed to recognize and they have failed to accept. And this radicalization is leading Hindus to the fold of Hindutva. This is something we need to accept, recognize and accept. Second, Hindus also need to recognize and start asking themselves that why is it that there are no internal debates in the Hindu society about issues that religious people should be talking about. For example, a universal human identity, or what a universal self is, what a human being is, what is the location of a human being in this cosmos, what is our cosmological understanding. These questions are absent from the discourses we see in Hindus. Hindus are not concerned with it, at least in India. The only question Hindus are grappling with it is whether India belongs to them and whether they would be able to dominate Muslims and Christians and turn them into second-class citizens or not. And I'm simplifying a bit, but I think this simplification is very necessary to understand what India is going through and where we stand, and what are the ways we can respond to this crisis that Hindus are in. But as I say, that it doesn't help Muslims and it doesn't help Christians if we go to them and say that, look, we are in a society which is in crisis and we are grappling with it. It doesn't help them. It in no way lessens the attacks on Muslims and Christians. So I would say that the question is political. It's not religious. Hindus need to choose their side, whether they would stand with secular forces, whether they would go with a political understanding, which, yes, citizenship is a question, but now we know that human beings must view themselves as essentially migratory entities. They would keep migrating from one geographical area to another geographical area. So how would they be viewed, for example, in the United States of America, or in Europe, or somewhere else? Why don't Hindus ask this question that Hindus in the United Kingdom or Great Britain can now hold important position in the government? For example, the foreign secretary is a Hindu, or the person looking after their finances is a Hindu. But we in India cannot imagine even a Muslim prime minister, cannot imagine a Muslim chief minister in Uttar Pradesh or Assam or Gujarat. I think these are the questions we need to ask ourselves in India and also in diaspora, because diaspora is a great source of support for the forces which act in the name of Hindutva. Their support flows from them. And that's why the diaspora friends need to discuss and debate these issues. As we talk, I just before I entered this meeting room, I was looking at a video from a place where a Muslim is being forced to spit and then lick his own spit and then chant Jai Shri Ram and Bharat Mata. So now Jai Shri Ram and Bharat Mata Ki Jai have merged, and it is this which is now defining Hindu identity, and it is this which is now telling Muslims and Christians to subscribe to it and then prove their loyalty to the land of India. So as I said, it's a geographical question related to India. It doesn't go beyond India, and it doesn't raise any, in true sense of the term, any religious or theological question. It is not. It is in fact a question: which are the forces which are going to control India? And I would conclude by saying that it also doesn't help us when we say that Hindutva would control India. Again, to make things very clear, it's the RSS which is going to control India. And Hindus will have to subscribe to the RSS version of Hinduness. For example, RSS went to Kerala 2 years back and told them to celebrate Onam as Vaman Jayanti. I don't know whether you know about Onam or not, whether you know about Bali or not, Mahabali or not, whether you know that Malayali Hindus celebrate the return of their king Bali, who was cheated by Brahman Vaman. But this North Indian Hindutva variety went to Kerala and asked Malayali Hindus to celebrate it as Vaman Jayanti instead of a celebration of return of King Bali. Similarly, they went to West Bengal and told Bengal to celebrate Ram and Hanuman instead of Durga and Kali. And they were so audacious as to tell Bengalis and the people who live in Mithila, region of Bihar, and a population which is compulsive fish eater, not to eat fish on Tuesdays, because Tuesday is a pious day for Hindus, and they should not eat fish or meat. So they went to Bengalis to tell them not to eat fish, at least on Tuesday. So this is the kind of Hinduness, even if we leave Hindutva aside, Hinduness that RSS is trying to impose on Hindus of India across regions. So Hindus of Kerala or Hindus of Tamil Nadu or Hindus of Bengal or Odisha would be asked to subscribe to a variety of Hinduness which RSS is prescribing. So as I said, that Hindutva, to simplify it and to make it very clear, Hindutva is a way of life which RSS would dictate and Hindus will have to subscribe. But that again doesn't help, because Muslims and Christians would lose all their cultural and political rights if becomes the dominant force, and it has already become in India. Here I conclude, and if there are questions.
Thank you, Apoorvanand. As again, very, very clear and very truthfully, you have told us what is going on in India. Now, before we go to question and answer session, there are two slides that Sarah is supposed to show for the coming Saturdays, and then we go to question and answer sessions.
I
Sarah?
think Rafat uncle will have to show. There's some
Okay.
problem with this
All right.
Zoom. I'm using another laptop. It's not mine.
That's fine.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have those slides.
Oh,
I send you all three.
Okay, let me check.
I can try again if it works, because this is not my laptop. I'm not in my own zone.
Haris is here. Rafat also has those slides anyway. I cannot do this because of this computer. The Zoom doesn't take my.
I don't see in my inbox.
Okay, I did send to you anyway.
Okay, I think I
let's-
can leave and come back, and then maybe this can work.
Okay, that's fine. So Rafat.
Yeah, send me again and then I will check.
Okay, at the end maybe or in between you can do that. I'll send it again. And now we move to question and answer session, which is moderated by Dr. Rafat Hussain. And so Rafat, take care of it, please.
Okay, thank you, Razi Bhai, and excellent discussion. And thanks to Professor Rambachan, Professor Apoorvanand, and Ms. Sunita Viswanath. It was an excellent discussion. And there are two options to ask the questions. One is you can raise the digital hand, or you show your interest in the chat box. I see there is a lot of discussion going on in chat box, but if you are really interested to ask a question, you show your interest. And there are most of them are the comments, so I'm not taking them as a questions. So if you are interested, raise your hand or show your interest. So there is a question from someone from iPhone, and she or he, yeah, please unmute yourself, whoever is logged in as iPhone. And if not, we move on and check. Mr. Rahul has raised the hand. Rahul, and the next person will be the Samiuddin. Thank you. Unmute yourself, Rahul Saab. And
hello, thanks everybody. Just a question to all the panel. If you have been watching Deepak Yati Tyagi or Sanjay Dikshit and his tribe, then they have been quoting the Gita extensively, almost every alternate day, to justify dharma yuddha or ethnic cleansing of you know whom. So how is this to be seen? Because they have a very committed audience, and they are using the text to to interpret it violently, even more violently than what Savarkar had proposed. So how is this to be seen in the perspective of interpretation and action? Thanks.
okay, Rambachan Saab.
Thank you very much for your excellent question, Rahul. It is true and we acknowledged. And this is why I am saying that it's important that we deal with the fact that those who advocate the ideology of Hindutva, we must recognize that they are also claiming Hindu identity. So the use of sacred texts and sacred traditions to invoke violence against others, to summon hate and marginalization of others is not new. And this is the reason why, Sunita ji and myself and Apoorvanand in this panel are saying that we have those of us who want to challenge the ideology of Hindutva and their reading of the Hindu tradition and what it means about relationships with Muslims and Christians. We have to contest their interpretations of the tradition, including their reading of sacred texts and their reading of sacred texts out of context. So our response has to be a vigorous challenge to such readings of the text, and I think that can be done, and many of us are engaged in that work of challenging. This is why I said in my comments that what we are witnessing is a deep battle with significant historical consequences about the nature of the Hindu tradition and what its core standpoints are or are not.
Thank you, Professor.
I would like to just quickly add to what
Go
Anand
ahead.
said, which is, as somebody who is just a layperson, I'm not a religious scholar, I'm a person who is doing work and living life as a Hindu, and I also read these statements and they upset me very much. But I vouch for the fact that there's so much in those same texts that if we just read the Gita, there's so much in the Gita that tells us how to live a good life. And this notion of paradukha dukhi, which is somebody who sees the joys and sorrows of another as our own, just that is enough for a lifetime of living a good life that's based in love and not hate. And the one thing that's very liberating for me is that, and I speak often to people from other religions, and I don't always hear the same sentiment from my colleagues who are from other religions, which is that in Hinduism, in my religion, I feel very liberated to interpret, according to my heart. And so we have Smriti and Shruti texts. Some texts are considered divinely revealed, and some texts have human authors. And the Tulsidas Ramayana has a human author just 400, 500 years old. That tells me that, I am empowered to say no to some teachings from my religious texts and say yes and embrace some teachings. That is not heretical or blasphemous. I can do that. And I believe whenever we encounter any text, political text, work of literature, or a scriptural text, we are doing that. We are interpreting it. And so again, sort of amplifying what Anandji just said, it is up to us to interpret according to the goodness that we seek in the world.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
The next
Ram-
person is Samiuddin Saab, and I request the person asking the question, please be brief, and also the panelist to be brief, because there are so many people are lined up here. Thank you. Samiuddin Saab.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking my question. My question is why there is total silence from the world community, especially the so-called Muslim world. And the second thing is, are Muslims in India waiting for another Bosnia or Rwanda in coming days or coming years? What do you see?
I respond to it? Should I respond to
Yes,
it?
please. Yes.
Yeah.
Samiuddin Saab, Muslims are not silent. Muslims are resisting. And I think the best thing that has happened in the last 5-6 years is that Muslims have been very vocal, and especially the younger ones. You have seen this wonderful, amazing protest led by Muslim women. which is now known as Shaheen Bagh. And Shaheen Bagh did succeed in forcing the Indian state to step back because it has not been able to yet frame rules for the Citizenship Amendment Act. And this I see as a partial victory of Shaheen Bagh. So we must not think that Muslims are waiting for their genocide. No, they are resisting. And they are taking recourse to all constitutional means. And they have yet not given up hope in the democratic methods that India has, because India is a very complex political terrain. So you have West Bengal, and you have Tamil Nadu, and you have Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and other states. Muslims are investing themselves politically in these processes, and Muslims are also forcing the constitutional institutions, that is the judiciary and other institutions, to do course correction. It's a battle Muslims, and if you look at what young Muslim journalists have done, how do we know about this Sully deal or Bully Bhai? How do we know about the minds that are behind? How do we know about the conspiracy of Delhi violence? It has been done by Muslim journalists, young Muslim journalists. So I see great hope. And if there is a source of hope for persons like me, it is this Muslim community fighting with all its resources, with constitutional means. And it is telling Hindus that, look, you cannot allow Hindutva forces to take over the Hindu space. So it's also giving throwing a challenge to Hindus to rise to the occasion and prove themselves true to constitutional values. I don't think that Muslims are silent, but it's that their Hindu compatriots have to prove themselves equally committed to constitutional values as Muslims are.
Sir, do you hear any voices from the world community, like America is totally silent, European Union is silent, Muslim world is silent? So it is encouraging more and more these forces in India.
Why? We know why they are silent. We know it very much. There are geopolitical reasons. There is a China problem there, and India can come as a support or help to the United States of America's strategic aims. And that's why not only America, I would say the whole Islamic world is watching silently. And it has not said a word. The attacks on Christians have risen exponentially. The number of attacks on Christians is 500, approximately 500 in 2021.
Rafat, let's move on to brief questions and brief responses. Okay.
Thank you. The next person is Abhishek Rao, please.
Thank you. It's a privilege to join this discussion and see all of you. I have two very short questions. One is that RSS, already has, like they have built their own agenda, propaganda, and a kind of a homogenized Hinduism, because Hinduism, after all, is a very diversified religion. Like, say, the god and goddesses that probably is worshipped in Kashmir is not the same thing as worshipped in Kerala. But I somehow feel that as they are creating a kind of a homogeneous kind of a like propaganda, the same way we do not discuss these variations of Hinduism. Why are we scared that this is not what the Hinduism that the RSS is preaching is actual Hinduism? And also the other side, whenever there are any fundamentalist of any religion, suppose maybe there is an Islamic fundamentalist, saying something on Islam or on Christianity or any other or also Hinduism, that even someone who is misinterpreting Islam, I being probably I'm not a practicing Hindu, but can say, no, this is not what Islam is all about. Or a Muslim can also say, no, this is not the Hinduism all about. I think this kind of independence of mind and expression, and if we can really create a world net, because I somehow find that whenever some such thing happens, even people who are highly educated, highly placed and all, it becomes very, very conflicting and divided. Thank you.
I'm not sure what the question was, but I agree completely, absolutely agree. And actually, if anybody wants to send me their mailing address, their postal address, whether you're in India or in the States or anywhere, we can send you this beautiful calendar that we made in Hindus for Human Rights, which celebrates exactly what the person asked, Abhishek ji was just saying, which is this glorious diversity of Hindu existence and beyond Hindu existence, you know, a syncretic Indian existence. And this calendar really brings together that diversity. And it's sort of, you know, it's a response to your more Hindutva type of Hindu calendar, but it's not done in that way. It's just a beautiful constructive thing. So if you send me your address, I'll send that to you by mail.
Thank you.
Just two quick comments to that, because I think it's two important points, and I agree. And I think Apoorvanand addressed that. One is that I think we are seeing, and this goes back to Savarkar's privileging of what he calls Sanskriti culture. So I think that Hindutva comes with a movement on orientation towards the homogenization of what is a very rich and diverse tradition in India, which can be extended to other traditions. And secondly, I think that in today's context, we need to speak up for each other. I think that is what I want to lift that point. You know, in other words, we don't only speak as Hindus when our rights are infringed or when our tradition is threatened. We learn to speak up for each other. This is our moral obligation when we see ourselves as belonging to a universal human community, as I think my tradition requires me to see. That comes with the ethical obligation to speak not only for my own community, but to speak for every human community.
Thank you so much. And next person is Salman Quraishi Saab. So I ask all of you, please ask the question, no background, please, because it's already been discussed. Go ahead, Salman Quraishi Saab.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is whether we are not falling into the Orientalist trap, which is, in my mind, focusing on the religious as if this problem and the political dimension is a result of religious intolerance. That's what the West has been doing for so many years about Islam. So, and my question is it really going to help if we focus purely on religious tolerance and not on the problems of the failure of the liberal project, of the Enlightenment project?
Thank you.
I feel I have to just at least briefly answer that maybe working inside the religious realm, I mean, definitely is not the whole answer to this problem, but I insist that part of the answer to the problem is that within the religious sphere, we do the kind of work that, for instance, my organization is doing and theologically Ananchi is doing. The reason is, one, even if the leaders, the political leaders, the ideological leaders in the Hindutva world, even if they are not truly religious in their hearts, they are doing their work. They're mobilizing in the place where ordinary people come to pray, to be born, to die, to marry, etc., etc. They are coming and infiltrating the spaces where we live as religious beings. And so if people like us don't show up in those spaces, offering alternatives and pointing out, these horrific truths, which people really seem to not be awakened to, which is very upsetting to me. But if we don't show up there and provide alternatives, I don't see this improving. And the second reason, which I put in the chat as well, is that at least in the US, a lot of the way that Hindu right organizations are going from strength to strength is in interfaith spaces. There's a lot of power given to faith-based and interfaith organizations in the political realm. And so if we don't show up into those spaces, then the only people who are there talking to elected officials and so forth are Hindutva groups. And so it behooves us to speak as Hindus against Hindutva and enter those, intersected spaces of religion and politics. We have to show up there.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, when one claims commitment to a tradition, as I do, and when that tradition is summoned and invoked by those who also claim Hindu commitment to denigrate others, to call for genocide, then what choice do I have? Do I remain silent and say that or if I speak out, I am somehow becoming complicit in a colonial project? Or do I have an obligation when those who wear the saffron robe and claim the prestige of monasticism in my tradition call openly for violence towards others? And I don't understand my tradition as legitimizing or justifying that. If I don't speak out, where is my moral heart? Where is my moral commitment? What does commitment to my tradition mean if I don't challenge those who act unjustly and oppressively or call for injustice and oppression towards others? This battle has to be contested on many fronts. The religious battle is part of that front that we have to fight.
I also make a brief interjection.
Thank you.
It is, I want to respond to this. Because when we say that it's political, yes, it's political, but it's also religious violence. Because it's violence being done in the name of religion. And many people do participate in this act of violence, believing sincerely that they are performing a religious act. So we cannot deny this aspect of violence. And that's why I think, as I said, that I'm unable to speak from that location. But I would expect Anatanand, because he is equipped to speak from that location and tell Hindus what Hinduism is. And what they are doing is not Hinduism at all. Because, as I said, and I conclude, that many people in India and many Hindus in India sincerely do this, believing that what they are doing is Hinduism. That is what needs to be contested.
Okay, thank you. Next person is Pratap Behra Saab.
Okay, namaskar. Just I tell a brief question, can call it a question or observation. So what I see is it's a question of political power equation. One group is currently misusing religion to gain power. What I also see is that the secular parties, the secular groups, they are becoming organizationally weak, very weak, at least in India. Then the second thing that I would also acknowledge, that fundamentalists have been there, are there across, if not all, many religions. So they are going to be there, those elements are going to be there. But the secular groups, if they are not organizationally strong, we will be not getting much. So it's time we nurture the secular parties groups. How do we strengthen them? That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratap sir.
Pratap Saab, I agree with you. I don't see the two initiatives as excluding each other. I think that the secular groups who would engage in this struggle largely from a human rights perspective, legal human rights perspective, are very, very important, because fundamental human rights of everybody in a society must be protected. But if we engage in that struggle only from the perspective of the discourse of secular human rights, as valuable as this would be and as and it gives us access to certain legal measures, we will fall short, because then we would conclude that religion has no resources to make claims about human dignity, human rights, human freedom, about respect for diversity. So we need to summon the most beautiful resources of our traditions that are there to complement those who are engaged in defending the rights of others from the perspective of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other such constitutional measures. That complementary approach, I think, is very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Next is Emmanuel.
Thank you, scholars and activists, for enlightening us along this topic. So my question is, in a lot of major world religions, there are in their scriptures there are contesting ideas, philosophies, and when, as Sunita ji suggested, we look for the goodness that we want to see in the world, and we interpret scriptures in that way. But when we do that, we bring in to our interpretation a morality outside of those scriptures. What if somebody who has a definition of justice, who is a casteist and has his own definition of justice, brings the same argument? How do you refute it in terms of when you view Hindu scriptures? Maybe Anandji can help us. How can we reconcile these inconsistencies in view of the morality that we bring in interpreting that outside of these scriptures?
Emmanuel, it's a huge question that those of us who study religious scriptures across traditions need to ponder together. But I can speak very briefly because of time and the depth of the question that you ask. I think that there are resources within the Hindu tradition that I myself employ to deal with this kind of issue. So there's no doubt, and Sunita ji has spoken to this already, that when we look at sacred texts, we see a variety of materials that are open to multiple kinds of interpretation. So then I ask myself a number of questions. How can I read, first of all, how can I read this text in historical and social context? It's a question of interpretation. In other words, which truths which of these teachings are speaking to particular historical context, and which of these teachings are speaking to universal trans-historical context? So for example, let me give you an illustration from my Hindu tradition. So for me, one of the most fundamental propositions of the Hindu tradition at the heart of its theological teachings is that the divine exists equally in all beings. That is not limited. That is not a tradition that is true, it's true in the 16th century and not in the 21st century. That is fundamental. Whatever we say about God, as Hindus, we will say that God exists equally in all beings. That's a non-negotiable. That then, because of that, the nature of that truth, that becomes the norm, the standard which I am going to use to read even other parts of my text. Right? And I will be critical of other part of my text if I can see that those teachings do not meet that very high theological standard about human equality and human dignity. Second point, very quick. In the Hindu tradition, a teaching is not true merely because it exists in a text that you consider to be sacred. There's another criteria. It must not contradict what we know to be true from other sources. So if you have a text, for example, and this came in some of the comments, if you have a text that speaks about caste or the hierarchy of caste, you can ask, do we have evidence from other sources that we consider to be authoritative that caste is an untrue, an invalid, and inappropriate way of thinking about human relationships? In other words, we have an extra scriptural norm where we can use to evaluate the truth or untruth of certain kinds of teachings. And I think that's a great resource that I as a scholar I've been using to read my text. You see, so that in other words, let me just make a statement is not true or valid merely because it occurs in a sacred text. There are other criteria to evaluate its work. Those are some of the resources that we can use, Emmanuel, for dealing with the kind of difficult issue that you have raised. And yes, there will be debates, but that's in the very nature of dealing with such material. So you have the great a statement by one of our great theologians, and he says, look, if a sacred text tells you in 100 verses that fire is cold, and you know otherwise, you are under no obligation to accept that as true.
Thank you, Professor. So there are 4 more people lined up, and probably we will restrict to those, keeping in mind the restriction of mind. So the next person is Professor Muhibul Haq.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Basically, the observations that were made by the scholar, they were great, but how to counter this particular ideology, that is Hindutva. And I'm in agreement with Sunita ji and Rambachan Sahab that yes, you have to invoke Hinduism. And of course, the Hinduism or the spiritual tradition, then only you can counter, because we must remember that Hindutva forces have perfected the art of othering. The moment you apply something, if you become outsider, you're not going to be acceptable to the people, those who are trying to, address. And this is the reason that invoking Hinduism, for example, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, or for example, Sarvadharma Sambhava, these are the things. What is the second very important point is that you see the two challenges that Hindutva has faced. One is from the communist ideology. Of course, they have done a great job in challenging Hindutva ideology. And the second is Ambedkarite, the people in our country. But you see, both these people, most of the time, they're lined up as, someone coming from a background of secularism or atheistic tradition. And this was the reason that they were not very much acceptable to the people at large. And this is the reason, as a counter strategy, how to counter this, we must remember that Hinduism is a spiritual tradition which is being, monopolized as a private limited company by the people, Hindutva forces. They want to speak, they want to enjoy the monopoly of speaking on behalf of Hindus. And this is the reason that the Hindu community or the
Professor, please ask the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
He had an
It was a
observation.
comment. It was a comment.
It was a comment. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Where is the question? Okay, next person is Harpreet.
I had several questions and comments, and this is my first time on the forum. My concern, somebody as a dance practitioner and being a non-Hindu in the sense I'm not born in this religion, has been that the voices from India, the lived voices of India, which I found true in the words of Ramanujam, have been missing. We are not getting that, How do we just quote one Ramanujam, and the way he describes many Rams, many Ramayans is something missing. And even the dance practices and living the gods also become very, very undemocratic in the sense, because it's mainly Brahmins who are doing it. Though I've been trying to deal it in my own way to a dialogical process, but my question is more socio-political, and in the current debate is like that, how much more such lived realities are required. I'm sorry for my voice. I mean, that the Hinduism is being lived, and Hinduism is what Ramanujam talks about. It's in that flow. So I am just searching for that narratives and creating that. How far, my question is to both the professors, how far those lived realities are more important to counter this kind of movement. And to just add that, recently this government telecasted something from the Dakshineshwar Kali Mandir, and the vision which Ramakrishna Paramhans had got in that context of the religious unity in the Shakti traditions to be lived was something as a discovery. So I somehow thank this government, for telecasting it and getting, and I would get to know that, I don't know whether we all are aware of that fact or not. So my questions are about those lived realities. How do you think they are important and how they can be brought about? I find myself a little alone in tracing them and picking them up.
Well, I don't have really an answer, but I don't know whether you are familiar with the work of T.M. Krishna or not.
Very much, Apoorvaji. We just had the article and thanked him for that.
Yes, so T.M. Krishna is one who is grappling with this issue, the issue of living realities, especially in the world of art and music and dance. And these questions are now being asked, the question of caste and the question of dominance in arena. But I think we need to do more. And we don't have many voices there, especially in the field of art and performing arts, I would say. We don't have many voices. I have only one T.M. Krishna, but I don't see any other voice rooted in traditions, which can speak from a position of strength. Because if you are not rooted in tradition, you can't speak about them. So that's the issue. So as I said, that I don't have really an answer, but this is a struggle we have to undertake.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one Ramanujan, and there are Ramanujans. I won't say that there are none in India, but in India now it's becoming more and more difficult to practice it, because the forces of Hindutva are homogenizing all cultural spaces, and it's becoming difficult to practice, so to say, these dissident voices or to express them, because you would immediately come under attack and you have to survive in India. So that's another thing we have to take into account while talking about it. And that's why Hindutva is very dangerous, because it won't allow you to practice art and literature in true creative or democratic sense, even theater.
Yeah, Professor Apoorvanand, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but another name I can bring from the performing arts field is Malika Sarabhai. She,
Malika is again, she's creatively engaging with dance forms, but T.M. Krishna is raising other questions Malika has not raised, and I don't hold it against Malika, because T.M. Krishna is raising a different set of questions, the question of caste, and because they have not been discussed in field of art.
Okay, thank you, Razibhai. How much time we do have? There are 4 people keep raising hands. There are 4 people lined up now. Next person is Satyanath.
Rafat, after 2 questions, ask Sarah whether she can show you the slides, and then we go the rest. And
yeah,
you have 20 more minutes.
Okay, I can show you the slide. Let's try
Okay.
both ways.
Okay.
Thank you.
Slides.
Okay, Satyanath Saab.
Yeah, thank you very much for recognizing me. First of all, let me point out to you that certain message I wanted to put to everybody, everyone in this Zoom, and I'm unable to. It only gives me option of just a few people. I don't understand why that's happening. Okay, now let me go to the message that I wanted everybody to have. Is that, you see, the problem lies that it lies in in magnifying the merit, so-called merit, to be measured by some tests over everything. Okay, so for anything, any kind of power or any kind of privilege, anything you want, you have to get a test, and that will measure your merit, or give them a certificate or something. And that is the supreme thing. And in that, one particular group kind of has excels the other. The upper caste has a
Satyanath Saab, please go ahead directly to your question.
yeah, so has a monopoly sort of on merit and overall, and they have captured all possible spheres of power. Okay, so therefore whoever is against something like reservation has that particular party seems more committed to be against reservation, is at the top, is favored by all the upper caste Hindus. And in America, more than 90% of the Indians are upper caste Hindus, even though in India itself, it's only about 15%. So if somebody starts Hindus for sharing power among all segments of the society, be that segmentation based on religion, caste, region, gender, everything, that has to be the supreme. The power sharing needs to be the supreme motto of government, of the whole society. Then this kind of Hinduism will, no matter whatever the scriptures wrote, because one is born in a...
Satyanath Saab, I am so sorry to interrupt you again. If it is a comment, then you do you have a question? Please ask the question, because we have very limited time left. Please. Sorry.
I only had a comment. I have no questions really. So let me conclude that it is, if somebody, you see, in India, there are two kinds of akhadas, two spheres of conflict. One has been created by the RSS and upper caste Hindus as the communal akhada. The other kind is the social justice or power sharing akhada, and that was getting strengthened by something called like a Mandal committee, Mandal report. Then this guy, Bajpai, had said that, well, उन लोगों ने मंडल उठाया तो हमें कमंडल से जवाब देना पड़ा. So mandal
Satyanath Saab, please conclude in a last sentence, because we are running out of time. Please. I'm so sorry. No, don't go anymore. You
all
just
right.
say thank you.
One sentence.
Thank you.
The only way you can defeat communalism is by attracting those people who are watching this communal conflict and getting excited by that.
Thank you. We got it. We got it. Thank you so much. No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And the next person is Raju. Raju Raja Gopal, please.
Yes. First of all, I wanted to thank the excellent panel. It's been very, very informative. I'm from Hindus for Human Rights and a colleague of Sunita. I just had a brief comment and a question which may not be answered here, but I wanted to raise it. When we talked about varying interpretations from the scriptures, what happens when somebody else uses the same scripture to interpret caste in a different way? My answer is when Rambachan ji said that you have to look elsewhere to talk about it, one obvious place to look at is the Constitution of India. And when I look at caste, if somebody says the scriptures support caste, I would say no, caste takes, the Constitution takes precedence over the scriptures. So I just wanted to make that one point. Question, I may have missed this if somebody talked about it, when we talked about homogenizing or attempts to homogenize Hinduism by various means. I don't know if any references were made to the new national education policy. And I believe that's another major effort starting in the schools to homogenize the way people look at Hinduism, including forcing Hindi as a language, as a national language through the back door. So I know there's no time to answer that question, but I just wanted to raise that question because I think that's one of the major tools that is also being deployed right now to homogenize Hinduism. Thank you so much.
Should I make one brief comment? That again, we need to understand that problem that we are facing in India today is not whether Hinduism would be homogenized or not. It is whether attack on Muslims and Christians would stop or not. And that is the question we need to face and answer. And for that, we need to have our political strategies right. Because this battle would go on about the nature of Hinduism and what Hindus are going to decide about themselves. Of course, it's related to the other question. But the question before us is how to stop this majoritarian violence. And this is something world needs to start talking about. Diaspora people and other friends, that this violence needs to. We cannot wait for Hindus to take a decision whether they would go this way or that way.
Yeah, thank you, Apoorvanand ji. I totally agree with you.
Rafat?
Yeah, next person is Professor Naqvi. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Okay, Professor Naqvi sir. And after that, I show you the slides, Rajula.
Hello. Hello. I'll try to be brief. I've just, to the esteemed panel, I just wanted to tell that the modern thing, the current thing that's going on in India, a lot of parallel with Nazi Germany. I mean, keeping all the factors, education and all those things, everything was there. So do you think that's true? And what do you think, what is the underlying fact that all the rational thinking, the education goes to thrown into trash and people start behaving like that? Thank you.
Okay, so
in any of the panelists, please.
Yeah. So Sarah, be ready to share the slides.
Oh, I thought you were doing it. Okay, I will do it.
No, but you said you fixed it. I can also do that, but I have
Okay, please respond to this question from Mr. Kashan Naqvi. Any of you, Sunita or Apoorvanand ji or Rambachan?
Which is, if I understood it correctly, that whether India is going the Nazi way or not.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes. Yes.
You're gone almost.
It's almost there.
Yeah.
So we should not deny the fact that whether we are a step 9 or 10 on that ladder, but we are moving in that direction. And
my question is, what is the reason? What is the reason?
So to talk about reason, it will again take us about an hour to talk about reasons, but we have to understand that we are there. RSS has penetrated almost all state institutions. And the police across India belongs to, in a way, RSS. Judiciary is also compromised. And the most dangerous thing which we are witnessing in India is that we see dangerous signs from army, which is unprecedented. But which now ex-army people say that it was always there. Now it's expressing itself. So we are in a very dangerous situation, and all political parties, all social forces need to put their head together, use elections creatively, because elections are the only way left to somehow push BJP out of power. And once we have pushed BJP out of power, then we can work on other things. But if BJP continues to be in power in Uttar Pradesh and other areas, then it is going to be very, very difficult to retrieve or recover India. And world also has to play a role.
Could I give a very brief response to this excellent question? Because I hear the question, certainly as Apoorvanand has answered, but I hear something broader in this question. I want to just comment briefly on it. So my
Yes.
brother, I hear you asking also where our education has failed. Why is it that in spite of
Yes.
such high educational standards, we end up in this position of mutual hate and the kind of predicament in which we find ourselves? And I agree with the premise of that question, because when we look historically, and you reference the Nazi regime, we see that the people who were perpetrating the evils of Nazism were very highly educated people. They put their education to.
Sarah, can you please stop in between the talk? Response is going on, right? Okay, yeah. Thank you.
They put their education to the cause of death and to the destruction of the other. And we have a lot of historical examples of that. So the education of the head is not enough. We need something more. We need an education of the heart. Let me end with one example. Maybe you have seen this. One of the most graphic photographs that came out after the United States bombed Japan at the end of World War is a young Japanese boy carrying the body of his dead baby brother on his back to a cremation site. And when he got to that cremation site, one of the soldiers standing there said, "Let me help you carry the body of your baby brother because it must be very heavy for you." And he said, "No, it is not heavy. He's my brother. He's my brother." And I think that until we all awake, not only in head, but in heart, that every human being is our brother and our sister, that universal vision, and that the joy of the other is our joy, the pain of the other is our pain, to embrace each other in that universal vision, the transformation not only of the head, but the transformation of the heart. Sometimes the distance between the head and the heart is the greatest to overcome. I think that is an essential point for our collective salvation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Razibhai, before we conclude, there are two more people, and do you want to show the slides?
I want to just add here, to the question about are we heading towards Nazi Germany? And just about a few months ago, somebody who's an uncle to me, like an uncle who raised me, he's in England, and he came to our house in New York, and he sat at our dining table, And he said, he just sat with my family and said, if only Muslims are eliminated from India, the GDP will go up, not just threefold, manyfold. He said this at my dining table in my home, and he's my dad's friend, and I couldn't just throw him out. But also, we just had Diwali just a few months ago, and I had a reality check because I do this work and I'm with people like you all who are, awake to what's happening in India and concerned and terrified. And Diwali, was an occasion where I stepped back into usual mainstream community spaces, Hindu spaces, family spaces. And honestly, I couldn't believe how people have no idea that anything is wrong. And if I or anybody raised, any questions about what's happening in India, there would be a sense that you're a downer, that you're an idiot or whatever. So yes, India is headed in a very, very dangerous direction, and maybe towards something as horrific as Holocaust or something along the way. But I reiterate that part of the work that we all have to do is inside the Hindu community, which is sleeping at the wheel. And when this goes to whatever its conclusion is, Hindus will also be victims to hate. Hate will not only target Muslims and Christians, it will end up coming for all of us. And so I sort of end, my last comment is on a plea to please be open to the work that people like Anantji and I are doing in the Hindu community. And Raju.
Razibhai, you want me to share now?
Yeah. Before you share, let me say that Amir Bhai should.
No, there are two more people. There are Tahir Mahmood Saab and Sayyid Amir Saab.
So after Rafat, can you bear for another 5 minutes? So show the slides, and then Amir Bhai and Tahir Mahmood Saab will raise the questions or make the comments. That will be within couple of minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Rafat. So this will be our upcoming Saturday's talk, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Partition and a Lyric History of India by Professor Amir Mufti from UCLA. And it will be introduced by Salman Qureshi Saab from Canada and Dr. Shah Naved Saab, who will do the concluding remarks. And after this poster, we are coming to a poster which we have been planning since long. And this is a sort of super event, which Danish Iqbal is working very hard in Jamia and in India. This will be a replay of the last assembly of poets in the court of Bahadur Shah Zafar before British took over. So popularly called as Shamay Shabistan-e Delhi, which is the last recreation of the last Mushara at Red Fort. And that will be on 29th, but we keep on playing this to every Saturday for more promotion's sake. Thank you, Rafat.